We have some exciting news and details for the new Apple MacBook Pro 14-inch release date and price that I want to share with you. We also have some really exciting news about the whole new design and also the new Apple Silicon processor M1X for the 14-inch MacBook Pro 2021 model. So if you want to hear the latest gaming news, tech news, reviews and comparisons, hit that subscribe button followed by the bell. So back in November 2020, we saw the release of the new Apple Silicon chip, the M1, what is now inside the new MacBook Pro, Mac Mini and of course the new MacBook Air 13-inch model. Apple said in the summer that there would be a 2-year transition of moving all of its Macs over to its own chipsets, and this includes the iMacs and the Mac Pro and the MacBook Pro 16-inch model, and also a newly designed 14-inch MacBook Pro. Today I want to focus more on that MacBook Pro 14-inch. So before that, I want to know from you guys, do you own a Mac at the moment? And if you do, what Mac do you currently have? Or if you don't have one, are you planning on getting one anytime soon in the future? I would love to know these details, so drop them in the comments and hit that like button at the same time. Cheers! So for design, Min-Chi Kuo, a great Apple leaker, believes that the long-rumoured 14-inch MacBook Pro will gain a completely new form factor design. The actual design of the 14-inch MacBook Pro is actually looking likely to be similar to the current 16-inch MacBook Pro that has smaller bezels around the edge of the screen, and for the design to have much more of a slate look to fall in line with the new iPad Pros, Air and also the iPhone 12 and 12 Pro look. At the end of the day, Apple want their Pro line to look distinctive. It is likely we'll get a slightly larger battery inside the 14-inch MacBook Pro over the already impressive 20 hours we get with the 13-inch MacBook Pro with an M1 chip inside, and this is looking likely to increase up to 22 hours of usage out of the battery with the M1 chip. Other changes most likely to see are a slight increase in the touchpad size. However, the current touchpad is very generous in its size already, but it will be slightly larger. There are also rumours that the actual touch bar, so this is the interactive bar above the keyboard, will also get Force Touch integration inside it. Other changes include a higher definition webcam built inside the camera setup on the MacBook Pro, but we wouldn't see Face ID as Apple are continuing to push with Touch ID in their keyboard setup, what makes sense really, as this is part of the Mac what we most use. Also, to quash any rumours out there, the actual screen of the MacBook Pro will not have any touch sensitive ability, as Apple believe this is what you'd use an iPad for instead if you needed to. For release date of the MacBook Pro 14-inch, we are looking towards the second half of 2021, around the September and October time. It is most likely we'll see updates to the iPad Pro and the iPad Mini in the first half of 2021 first before any updates to the Macs. But check out my iPad videos on my channel for more information about this. For price wise, we expect a slight increase on the price as we do have a brand new design model with some spec changes, so we believe it will get around about a $100 price increase on the MacBook Pro 13-inch what is available right now. So the baseline 14-inch MacBook Pro would start at $1,399 and this would give you the standard Apple Silicon chipset with 8GB of RAM and also 256GB of storage space. So moving on to the chipset next. For the Apple Silicon chipset in the new 14-inch MacBook Pro, we could be seeing the new M1X chipset that will be around 40% faster than the current M1. Based on the past, when Apple brings out an X or Z variant of their A chips, so these are the chips that you find say in an iPhone or an iPad, it normally has a few more cores inside them and the chipset is around 40% faster than the standard A number already mentioned. Now, before we get overexcited about the new M1X chipset and the new 14-inch MacBook Pro design, it is most likely Apple will keep the same specs and options that we got in the MacBook Pro M1 13-inch model. Basically, what I'm saying is the new MacBook Pro 14-inch model will have the same specs as the current 13-inch M1 specs. Now, the reason behind this is Apple loved to do this when they transition from an old design to a new design. History has shown us over the last 15 years or so that Apple always do this when they move from one design to another. For example, if I take the last design MacBook Pro 13-inch model that came out in 2015, and this was the last of the Retina MacBook Pro that still had the usual USB-C ports and everything was just super thin, those exact specs, so I'm talking about the processor, the RAM and the storage options, were all put into the brand new Touch Bar 13-inch MacBook Pro. There was no bump up in specs of a new Intel chipset, RAM or storage upgrades until the following year in the 13-inch MacBook Pro. Again, Apple did this in 2012, for example, when they transitioned from the unibody MacBook Pro, so this was the last MacBook Pro without a Retina display, to the Retina display model, and again kept the same chipsets and the same amount of RAM and the same storage options. So I think you're getting the picture here. It is likely that the 14-inch MacBook Pro will keep the same specs as the brand new M1 chipset they currently have inside the 13-inch MacBook Pro, and the same for RAM and storage options. We've got to remember one thing here, guys, and that is the new M1 chipset is one of the best integrated chipsets out there at the moment. It has an all-in-one package of 8-core processor, 8-core GPU, dedicated RAM and a neural engine. All of this is based on the A architecture, like the A14 chipsets that we find inside the iPhone 12 and iPad Air 4. The M1 chipset is giving us faster speeds in macOS and also the ability to run iOS and iPad apps natively on your new Mac. The benchmarks for this chipset are faster than the top option 16-inch MacBook Pro that is available right now, with an Intel i9 processor inside it and 64GB of RAM paired. And yet the M1 13-inch MacBook Pro with just 8GB of RAM beats the Geekbench score by quite a bit, I may add as well, so Apple will most likely not upgrade this chipset inside the 14-inch MacBook Pro until at least 2022. So just a quick recap of what to expect of new Macs over the next year or so. So following the Mac Mini, MacBook Air and the 13-inch MacBook Pro as mentioned earlier, leaker Min-Chi Kuo believes the next Mac to get an Apple Silicon processor will be the MacBook Pro 16-inch, and that will be going along with the 14-inch MacBook Pro. Those Macs are unlikely to be updated until mid-2021 though. Kuo also suggests that these new MacBook Pros won't ship until the second quarter of 2021 or even possibly the third quarter of 2021, just as I mentioned earlier. If you're wondering where the Mac desktops figure up into this line, Kuo has made no announcements relating to Apple's plans transitioning desktop Macs such as the iMac to M1. With the iMac just updated with Intel processors in August time, it doesn't seem likely we'll get an update on these Macs for a while, so it seems likely the iMac won't see an Apple Silicon processor inside it until the end of 2021 or even 2022. Kuo is usually accurate. He said back in March 2024, before Apple announced the transition from Intel, that the new ARM-based Mac could arrive before the end of 2020, and he was definitely right. So, are you excited about the new Silicon 14-inch MacBook Pro line, and will you be getting one soon after launch? Let me know what model you'd like to get or what you're planning on getting in the future. Well guys, that is the latest and greatest we have on the 14-inch MacBook Pro Silicon line at this stage. If we get any more news, of course we will share it with you. Don't forget, if you ever liked this video, to press the like button, and of course to hear the latest gaming news, tech news, reviews and comparisons, please do hit that subscribe button followed by the bell. Until next time guys, see ya!